Today we are going to be focusing on the Song of Moses, which is part of this Torah portion. And I titled my class, Remembering the Song of Moses. And I did this because memory is in of itself a very powerful tool. Memory has the ability to correct and even prevent future sins. Memory connects us to our past and leads us on to the future. Memories are the tool that make life so sweet. The time that we spend together with family, with friends, with fellow believers, the time that we spend together raising our children, the stain that you may get on a shirt when you're out with friends, or even moms, I know this is hard to imagine, but even the fingernail polish that is on your favorite bedspread or on your carpet will one day be a story and a memory that you are able to share with not just your children, but your grandchildren. And those memories form the fabric of life. It's the good times and it is the bad times. It is both the personal as well as the national collective memory that bind us together. And you would think that for a nation so bent on preserving its own history, a nation so bent on preserving his own past, that remembering history, things that happened in your own life, would be second nature. You would think that for a nation with a heritage of national preservation, who had invested so much resources in remembering the past, that he of all people would have remembered his own past. But he didn't. He forgot the kindness of a man who had given him peace when he was at one of the lowest points in his life. He had forgotten the hope that had been given to him and the kindness that had been shown to him. Only days had separated him from certain death. He was depressed, he was anxious, and he was full of sadness. You see, he had been charged with treason, and he sat without hope. He sat without hope until Joseph interpreted his dream and reassured him that he would be exonerated of the charges levied against him. After being restored to his post, however, the chief butler forgot all about Joseph. He did not remember the kindness or the compassion Joseph had shown him when he was at life's lowest point. While Joseph was forgotten, he remained in captivity. While the butler forgot Joseph, Joseph remained a person stolen from another land. And while Joseph was forgotten, he remained unknown, lost, and forgotten from the rest of his family. Joseph was forgotten until he was needed. And when Joseph was needed, the butler remembered. The butler remembered Joseph's kindness. He also remembered Joseph, and Joseph was set free. Not only was Joseph set free, but he was exalted to a position of high rank within the realm. Memory is a powerful tool. The butler's ability to recall Joseph when it mattered the most. The ability to save Egypt from starvation when it mattered the most. Memory is something that God commands us to recall throughout the Torah. In fact, you find that memory is one of the most powerful tools that we possess. In Genesis 9:15, God tells Noah that he will look on the rainbow as the sign of his covenant with Noah, and he will remember his covenant, and he will remember to never again destroy the earth with a flood. God tells Israel in Exodus 13, verse 3, to remember the day they came out of Egypt. Remember that they came out of the house of bondage in the month of Aviv. He even instituted the celebration of Passover to remind them. And in Deuteronomy 16, verse 3, God tells Israel to eat unleavened bread, to remind them that they came out of Israel, that they were delivered in haste, that they were delivered so quickly Their bread was unleavened. It didn't even have time to rise in its troughs. In Exodus 20, verse 8, we are told to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy 5, verse 15, God tells us to remember the Sabbath day because we were once slaves in Egypt, slaves in a land where you had no rights and you did not have the luxury of observing a day of rest. We are told to remember that it was God who delivered us from the house of bondage. And in Numbers 15:39, we are told to wear fringes. We are told to wear fringes so that when we look on them, we will be reminded to obey all the commandments. We will remember the commandments and we will obey them. But what happens if we're afraid? What are we to do if we feel overwhelmed? God told Israel in Deuteronomy 7:15 to remember that all that God had done to Pharaoh in Egypt, the miracles he had wrought in the sight of the Egyptians. Moses tells Israel to remember the way that Yahweh had led them for 40 years in the wilderness, both to test them and to humble them, so that God would know what Israel's future would be. He would know Israel's heart, to know if they were willing to follow his commandments or if they would rebel against them. In Deuteronomy 24, verse 9, we are told to remember what God did to Miriam in the wilderness when she spoke against Moses. Memory is such a powerful tool. It's such a powerful tool that in Deuteronomy 9, verse 7, God tells Israel to remember. Not only to remember, but to make sure they do not forget that they indeed provoked God in the wilderness. That shortly after he wrought signs and wonders in Egypt, after he delivered them out of the house of bondage, they rebelled against him. He wanted them to make sure that they would not forget it. So in order to remind them of this, he instructed Moses to write a song in Deuteronomy 31, so that Israel would remember and she would not forget. Deuteronomy 25, verse 17, God tells us to remember what Amalek did to Israel, how he unmercifully attacked and killed the weak, the feeble, and the elderly among Israel's regiments. In the Song of Moses, we are told to remember the days of old. And in Exodus 32, verse 12, Moses pleaded for God to turn away his anger and to remember his covenants with Isaac, his covenants with Abraham, and his covenants with Jacob. In the formal written testimony, this is the contractual agreement between God and the nation of Israel. God in Leviticus 26, verses 42, makes a very strong promise. The previous verses in Leviticus 26 had outlined Israel's rebellion against God that she would commit when she enters the land of Canaan. It talked about how God would bless her, but then when she waxed fat and she rebelled against the law, God would give her to her enemies. He would deport her off the land. She would return in the Second Temple period for a period of time, but she would not remain faithful to her God. She would rebel once again and once again be deported and exiled from the land. But yet, even after all this history, after everything that came upon Israel, in Leviticus 26, verse 42, God promises to remember his covenants with Jacob, to remember his covenants with Isaac, his covenants with Abraham, and to remember Israel's land. No matter how rebellious Israel or her descendants have been. Memory is such a powerful tool that not even Israel's rebellion can separate us from the memory and the love that God has for us. He brought our ancestors out of the land of Egypt so that not only we may remember, but that God may also remember. In fact, we are told that after the diaspora after the blessings and the curses of Deuteronomy 28 have come upon the children of Israel, we are told in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 1, that we will remember the blessing and the curse. We're part of God's covenant. We will remember them among the nations where God has driven us. And we not only will we remember the covenants and the causes for the rebellion, but we will also remember to obey. And then, like Joseph, God will remember us, and he will return our captivity, and he will restore us to a place of honor among the nations. The command for Israel to remember God is not just a personal, individual command. It is also collective. It is a generation of people who recollect and remember their humble beginnings, who remember that they were called out of Egypt, not for their own righteousness, but because God is righteous, and he remembers his word. He remembers his covenants with prior generations. But the command is for Israel to remember who they are and where they came from. This is why God calls on us collectively to remember that Israel had rebelled in the wilderness. Look again at Deuteronomy 9, verse 7. God tells Israel to remember and to make sure to not forget that when he was testing them, when he was proving them in the wilderness to see what their history would be, that they rebelled against him. In Deuteronomy 8, verse 2, it states, "And you, O Yahweh, all the way," it says that you shall remember all the way which Yahweh your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and to prove you, and to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep the commandments of Yahweh or not. This was part of the reason for Israel's exile, the reason for their journey out of the land of Egypt through a dry and desert land, was to test Israel, to see if they were willing to obey. You know, in many ways, God dealt with Israel as what any scientist would deal with a chemical compound. He put fire to it. He put adversity to it to see how the people would react. He tested them with hunger. He tested them with the desert and barren land. He tested them with the lack of water to see if Israel was a stable compound, to see if she would stand firm in the face of adversity, or like a soluble substance, she would dissolve into her own doings, and she would forget the God that brought her out of Egypt and delivered her from the house of bondage. God passed his verdict in his instructions to Moses in Deuteronomy 31, verses 21, when he tells Moses to write a song of judgment. This is what God tells Moses in Deuteronomy 31, verse 21. He says, "For I know their imagination what they go about, even now, before I have brought them into the land which I swear." God learned a lot from Israel's testing in the wilderness, and he learned the heart of his people. And in Deuteronomy 31:19, if you go back a verse or two, this is the instruction, the specific instruction God told to Moses. He said, "Write you this song and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel." Memory is such a powerful thing that God wanted this song of judgment, to be put in Israel's collective memory, their national memory as a people. So to remember that they had rebelled against God's covenant, and to warn future generations of impending doom. You know, I've said it before, but it's true. Collective memory is a powerful tool. The combined memories of an entire group of people can actually change the course of history. Throughout history, our ancestors have left us with warnings, often through the written word. And all too often we forget, or we simply become indifferent. The question on this particular morning was, if one isolated town would forget, would they embrace indifference, or would they remember? Would they remember their collective history? Would they remember the warning that was given to them 1,000 years before by their tribal leaders? By the end of the day, this fateful day, over 15,000 people would perish. The question was, how many people from this small, remote town would fall prey to the coming calamity? This particular Friday morning was only mildly frigid. Spring hung the promise in the air, and the town awoke to its normal busy place. The island was small enough that children were able to walk to school. Women had begun the daily routine of household chores or working in nearby factories. And the men, they took their fishing boats out to sea. The sun glistened brightly. It was so bright that when it reflected on the water, and if you looked directly at it, the splendor of it brightened you for a few moments until you could regain your sight. But on this particular day, you could literally smell the work arising from the Japanese as they manufactured their goods. But by 2:30 in the afternoon, the kids were getting ready to get out of school, and they were antsy to get home. Little did they know that 15 minutes later, disaster would strike, and their lives would be changed forever. In only seconds, they would have to choose to follow the warning in their collective memory, the warning that their ancestors issued to them 1,000 years ago, to follow what seemed to be the fastest and most logical route of salvation, or to follow the instruction and the warning of their ancestors. At 2:15 on the afternoon of March 11th, 2011, a devastating 9.0 earthquake hit off the shores of Maruhama, Japan. This was followed by a 40-foot tsunami. Now, I don't believe I can do this story justice, so let me share with you what a Japanese engineer discovered in the course of the devastation as they began to rebuild the island. This is the story as he relates it. He states, a millennium ago, the residents of Maruhama, knowing they were going to be inundated, had sought safety on the village's closest hill. But they had entered into a deadly trap. A second wave, which had reached the interior of the island through an inlet, was speeding over the rice paddies from the opposite direction. The waves collided at the hill and killed those who had taken refuge there. To signify their grief and to advise future generations, the survivors had erected a shrine. This story may not have captured my attention had it not been for the fortuitous coincidence. The day before, an engineering colleague, Iki Tanjanuchi, had told me that researchers at Tokyo University in Sendai, Japan, had found sediments indicating that a huge tsunami had hit Mayutajima 1,000 years ago. Intrigued by the possibility of a connection between oral history and geological evidence, I asked the community leader if 1,000 years ago was a figure of speech or an estimate of time. To my astonishment, he indicated that it was in no way a figure of speech. Village elders had reviewed the local temple's records and found reports pointing to a large tsunami 1,142 years ago. It was most likely the result of the massive Jogen Jishin earthquake in AD 869, which devastated the Senryuko coast. Some 50 generations later, on March 11, 2011, Maruhama Tsunami Warning Tower, which was supposed to sound the alarm, was silent. It had been toppled by the tremor. Still, without the benefit of an official warning system supported by modern science, the locals relied on the lesson that had been written from generation to generation for over 1,000 years. We all know the story about the tsunami waves that collided at the shrine, the engineer was told. So instead of taking refuge on the closest hill, the one with the shrine, the people took the time to get to higher ground further away. From the safety of their vantage point, they saw two tsunami waves colliding at the foot of the shrine, just as it had 1,000 years prior. Memory is such a powerful tool. The villagers of Marhuama were saved because they remembered the warning of their ancestors, and they took heed. They remembered the words of warning issued to them generations before. Moses has issued a similar warning to Israel, yet the nation has historically refused to take heed. Instead, she declines to use the only tool that can truly set her free, the tool that can drive her from her diaspora and from her captivity and restore her to live once again in his sight. Today's Torah portion not only deals with God's command for Moses to write a song of judgment, but it tells, in this song, God tells Moses that he will issue this judgment because Israel will once again corrupt herself. In Deuteronomy 31:29, Moses tells Israel that Israel will corrupt herself and that this will occur in latter days. Now, the term Akirith, translated latter days, does not always refer to what we know today as the end time or the time of the end or some final apocalyptic phase. Rather, the term simply means any point in later history, at any point in the future. So this kind of does not necessarily support many of teachings within religious sects that look at the Song of Moses as something that occurs and is associated with the return of God when he no longer hides his face. But this song awaits for Moses and his generations to come in a latter generation for Israel. Join me as we read Moses' instructions in Deuteronomy 31, verse 27. This was God's word to Moses. And Moses states in the beginning, "For I know your rebelling and your stiff neck. Behold, while I am yet alive with you this day, you have been rebellious against Jehovah. And how much more so after I have died? For I know that after my death you will utterly corrupt yourselves and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you, because you will do evil in the sight of Jehovah, to provoke him to anger through the works of your hands." Now, remember Deuteronomy 31:16. God outlines his response to Israel's tendency to forget him, to forget his way of life, and to follow after wickedness. God's final judgment, leaving Israel to her own sketchy memory, in her own wayward devices. In verses 16 and 17 of Deuteronomy 31, God says to Moses, "You will sleep with your fathers, and the people who rise up after you, they will go whoring after other gods, whither they go. And they will forsake me, and they will break the covenant that I have made with them. Then my anger will be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them and hide my face from them. And they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles will befall them, so that in that day they will say, are not all these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? Now therefore, write you this song and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that it may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. And it will come to pass, when all these troubles have befallen them, this song will testify against them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed." Many prophets in Israel's history build upon Moses' song. The Song of Moses, this day wherein Jehovah would hide his face, the day wherein he would send no word to Israel, even though she earnestly desired and sought for it, the day wherein all the troubles written in the law would fall upon the children of Israel was not so affectionately termed by Israel's prophets the day of Yahovah. In fact, Zechariah tells us after the Jews return to the land and after they are living in the land once more, this is the warning that he gives to his generation collectively. In Zechariah 14, verse 1, he states, "Behold, the day of Yahovah comes, and his spoil shall be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." The second temple prophet Joel also talks about this day of Yahovah. In Joel chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, he says, "Gird yourselves and lament, you priests. Howl, you ministers of the altar. Come and lie in sackcloth, you ministers of my God. For the meat offering and the drink offering is withheld from the house of your God. Sanctify you a fast and call a solemn assembly. Gather all the inhabitants of the land into the house of Yahovah your God and cry out to Yahovah. Alas for the day of Yahovah is at hand, and it is a destructive day from the Almighty, and it shall come." You know, you find when you read through the prophetic text that although Israel's prophets saw the day of Yahovah as something that was dreaded and something that was horrible, the children of Israel believed the day of Yahovah to be one of light and of salvation. And Joel continues his prophecy. He continues his description of the day of Yahovah. In Joel chapter 2, verse 11, he states, "And Yahovah will utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, and he is strong that executes his word. For the day of Yahovah is great and terrible. Who can abide it?" The day of Yahovah's judgment was not an ordinary judgment, but it was a horrific day wherein people were recompensed for their crimes, such as murder and oppression and idolatry. It was a day wherein Yahovah would forsake his people. He would hide his face and allow spiritual and intellectual darkness to overtake them. Israel's natural propensity, her ability to easily forget the miracles that God wrought in Egypt, to forget the way of Yahovah, his way of justice and judgment, which he had taught them, left her to be an easy prey. Zephaniah had also prophesied during the reign of Josiah, as had Jeremiah. And he also points out to this coming judgment day, the day where Israel would once again be given to the sacrificial slaughter. In Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 12 through 15, Zephaniah tells us what Yahovah would do during this time of national judgment. In verse 12, he states, "And it shall come to pass that I will search Jerusalem with candles and punish the men that are settled on their lees, that say in their heart, Yahovah will not do good, neither will he do evil. Therefore their goods shall become as booty, and their houses a desolation, and they shall build houses, but not inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards, but not drink the wine thereof. The great day of Yahovah, it is near, and it comes quickly. Even the voice of the day of Yahovah, the mighty man shall cry bitterly. For it is a day of wrath, and a day of terrible distress, a day of wastedness and destruction, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of thick clouds." The darkness that began over Israel began at a noonday epoch in Israel's history, when the knowledge and understanding of truth was darkened. It was darkened by Israel's own sins, by her own forgetfulness, and by her own heart that led her astray. In Amos 5, the prophet tells us of a darkness that is not one darkness of gloom, but is a darkness of the knowledge of truth. In Amos 5, verses 18 through 20, we read of another facet regarding this time of judgment, this horrific judgment that would cover the land of Israel and all the people, whether they be in the land of Israel or in diaspora. This is what Amos states in verse 18. Woe to you that desire the day of Yahovah. To what is it for you? For the day of Yahovah is darkness, it is not light. As if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him, and when he went into a house and leaned on a hand on his wall, and a serpent bit him. Shall not the day of Yahovah be darkness and not light, even very dark, and there is no brightness in it? You know, it's in this state of darkness that Israel really forgets. She forgets to remember her covenant with God. She forgets to obey. God takes the word he had given to Amos, and he builds on it with Amos's son Isaiah through a very special commission that is given to Isaiah in chapter 6. This commission not only fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah's father Amos, but it also affects God's judgment against the nation of Israel. God's commission for Isaiah, his instruction for Isaiah's entire career, is given to him in Isaiah chapter 6. Now, we're going to read this text, but as we do, I want you to notice a few things regarding the chronology that God establishes in Isaiah chapter 6. If you will notice in verses 9 and 10, we will see that God not only commissions Isaiah to blind Israel, but to make the nation's ears heavy so the people cannot perceive and understand truth. God tells Isaiah that this blindness will last through the shattering and fall of the entire nation of Israel when people are taken into diaspora in verse 11. In verse 12, we will read that the blindness will remain while the land is utterly forsaken, left without the children of Israel living on the promised land. And in verse 13, we will read that of this people that went into Jerusalem, that had fallen to the captivity, that a tenth of them will return. But this remnant that returns will not be a remnant that will embrace righteousness. Rather than being a tree of righteousness as described in Proverbs 1, whose leaves never wither and whose flower never fades, God tells Isaiah that not only will the leaves of this generation wither, but they will fall off. This remnant's unrighteousness would allow them to be a prey that will be eaten by all of her enemies round about. And this generation, like the memorial in Moses' song, should not be forgotten. They should be remembered like a pillar and a monument to the act of Yahweh's judgment. The setting of Isaiah 6, verse 1, occurs around 745 BCE, in the year that King Uzziah died. Isaiah is given a vision. He sees Yahovah sitting on a throne, and not just a throne, but a throne of judgment. And the judgment that comes forth is set out in verse 7. So read with me, if you will, Isaiah chapter 6, verses 7, and we will read through verse 13. It says, "And he laid a coal on my mouth, and he said, Lo, this has touched your lips and taken your iniquity away, and by this your sin is purged. I also heard the voice of Yahovah saying, Who shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. For he said, Go and tell this people, listen indeed, but understand not. See you, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat. Make their ears so heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, be converted, and be healed. Then said I, O Yahovah, how long? And he answered me, Until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And Yahovah have removed men far away, and there be a great forsaking in the midst of the land. But yet in it shall be a tenth, and they shall return, and shall be eaten as a teil tree and as an oak, whose monument is in them when they cast their leaves. So shall the holy seed be for the pillar thereof. When we read the book of Isaiah, Isaiah tends to be a pivotal book for demonstrating the truth and the veracity of many doctrines, whether they be within Judaism or within Christianity. But notice Isaiah's mission. Isaiah's mission is not to spread light, but it's to spread darkness, to make our eyes heavy, to make our ears heavy, and to make our hearts fat that we cannot perceive or understand. So the natural question is, how does Isaiah do this? The answer is that Isaiah does this by one simple technique. He uses verbosity. He uses the gift of gab, and he will talk about the same event over and over and over again, so that we often think of it as multiple events rather than one single event to which Isaiah is referring. You know, other prophets have very short books, and their short books are very easily to be followed. But when you go and you read Isaiah, you find that he eases back and forth between periods of time. And unless you look to the law and the testimony, you find that many religious ideals end up out in left field. Now, Isaiah's commission was a righteous commission. It had a purpose that in the end would bless Israel. It was not all for judgment. It was not all for blinding. But as we will see, the blinding of Israel in itself contained a blessing. If you will remember God's words to Isaiah, that they should not perceive and should not hear, is very similar to the words God spoke to Moses in Deuteronomy 29, verse 4. When Israel was coming out of the land of Moab, about to enter the promised land, God told Moses in Deuteronomy 29, verse 4, that he had not yet given Israel a heart to perceive or eyes to hear until this day. While Israel could plainly see God's word, and she could plainly understand the testimony of her law, Isaiah's testimony thwarted her ability to perceive. In chapter 29, verse 9, Isaiah tells us the end result of this blinding of Israel. He tells us of the product of this process. In verse 9, he says, "Stay yourselves and wonder. Cry you out and cry, they that are drunken, but not with wine, and stagger, but not with strong drink. For Yahweh has poured upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and he has closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers and your seers he has covered. And the vision of all that is come to you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray you. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed." Isaiah continues to layer this aspect of Moses' song in Isaiah 42, verse 13, wherein God hides his face from Israel, and the nation walks in blindness, and she forgets her God. She forgets her first husband, and she worships other gods. And although God has been patient with her for hundreds of years, throughout the judges period and throughout the monarchy, God's mercy does indeed have its limits. And as Moses foretold, Israel's infidelity would provoke Yahweh's anger and his day of wrath. In Isaiah 42, verses 13 through 17, we are told, Yahweh shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yes, he shall prevail against his enemies. I have long holden my peace. I have been still, and I have refrained myself. Now I will cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make the mountains and hills waste. I will dry up the herbs, and I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up the pools, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and the crooked things will become straight. These things I will do to them, but I will not forsake them. They will be turned back, they will be greatly ashamed, that had trusted in graven images, and that had said to the molten images, you are our gods. This typifies the Song of Moses, a song wherein there is darkness and there is no light, where Yahweh takes his children by a way that he did not intend them to go, takes them through the valley of the shadow of death. He takes them out of the pleasant places that they had known within the land of Israel and under his system of government. And he sets a table and prepares it before them in front of their enemies. And he leaves them as a prey to all the nations round about. In Isaiah's blinding of Israel, he does not leave us without recourse. He does not leave us without a plan of action whereby we can take hold of truth and come out of our blind and deaf state. Isaiah tells us that if we will call upon the name of Yahweh, if we will sanctify him alone, and if we will take hold of that most powerful tool we possess to remember the plan that God had given to us at Mount Sinai and confirmed in Moab, then we will remember and we will be delivered. This is the instruction that Isaiah gives to those who remember God. And this is in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 13. This is what Isaiah says. Sanctify Yahweh of hosts. Let him be your fear and let him be your dread. Skipping down to verse 15. Many among them shall stumble and fall and will be broken and snared and taken. But bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples. Going down to verse 20. To the law and the testimony, they speak not according to this word. It is because there is no light in them. This is the light that rests for the nations today. This is the hope and the joy that we have and the plan of action that we have for coming out of blindness, for coming out of the day of darkness and remembering our God. We have to not only remember Yahweh and sanctify him, but also remember the law and the testimony. And from that, we will find a plain path. When Isaiah remembered Israel's wicked generations in chapter 64, verse 6, he remembered a generation from whom God had hid his face. He remembered Israel not for obeying the command to call on the name of Yahweh, but of a faithless people who refused to use God's name and they refused to take hold of God's promises. This is Isaiah's admonition in Isaiah chapter 64, verses 6 through 9. But we were all as an unclean thing, and our righteousness are but filthy rags. And we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, have taken us away. And there is none that calls on your name, that stirs himself up to take hold on you. Because you have hid your face from us, you have consumed us because of our iniquities. But now, O Yahweh, you are our Father, we are the but clay. You are our potter, and we are the work of your hands. Do not be angry with us, O Yahweh, neither remember our iniquity forever. Behold, we beseech you, we are your people. Can you relate to Isaiah's plea? The plea that he makes to God? The plea that he says to Yahweh, do not be angry with us, neither remember our iniquity forever, because we are your people. Last week, we looked both at a prayer and a question posed by King David. How long, will Yahweh's anger last. In Psalms 85, verses 4 and 5, David asked, will you be angry with us forever? Will you draw your sword out to all generations? Then David pleads, as does Moses and Isaiah, turn us, O Yahweh of our salvation, and cause your anger towards us to cease. Many prophets testify to the turning of Yahweh's anger, where this day of judgment would end, where his anger would no longer consume Israel for their sins. Micah, in chapter 7, verses 18 and 20, refers to a day where God pardons iniquity, and where he does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in mercy. Micah prophesies that God will return. In Micah 7, verse 19, he tells us, for Yahweh will turn again. He will have compassion on us. He will subdue our iniquities, and you will cast our sins into the depths of the sea. You will perform the truth to Jacob and mercy to Abraham, which you have sworn to our fathers from the generation of old. Remember Leviticus 26, verse 45? Remember that the testimony stated that Yahweh would remember his covenants. He would remember the truth that he spoke to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. He would remember the truth in those promises, and he would perform it. He would do it. Joel tells us how to get God's attention. He tells us how to cause God to remember us in our current state when we are scattered across the earth. Joel chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, the prophet states, therefore also now, says Yahweh, turn you to me with all your heart. Turn with fasting and with weeping and with mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments, and turn to Yahweh your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and great kindness, and he will repent of evil. Fasting and calling out to Yahweh is important. It demonstrates your sincerity. So this week, as we observe Yom Kippur, remember to take hold of Joel's words. Don't just fast to be fasting, but rend your heart and call upon the name of Yahweh. The setting of Isaiah 65 continues to be at a point in Israel's future, an epoch she has not yet lived. A day where a future generation finds Yahweh and takes hold of him, and it, like Jacob, is not willing to let go. Yet the memories of Israel's rebellion in all this remain strong. Had not God commanded Moses to write his song to testify against Israel's rebellion, to tell Israel how he would recompense her for his crimes? But in God's infinite mercy, Isaiah tells us that even in God's judgment, even in the horrific day of Yahweh, there yet remains a blessing in it. Isaiah 65 occurs at a time that we are beginning to live today. In verse 1, God states through Isaiah, I am sought of them that asked not for me. I am found of them that sought me not. I said, behold me to a nation that was not called by my name. I have spread out my hands all the day to a rebellious people, which walk in the way that was not good after their own thoughts. A people that provoked me to anger continually to my face, that sacrificed in gardens, that burned incense upon altars of brick, which remained among the groves and lodged in the monuments, which eat swine's flesh and broth of abominable things in their vessels, which say to others, stand by yourself and don't come near to us, because I am holier than thou. These people are a smoke in my nose and a fire that will burn all day. Behold, it is written before me. It is written before him like the song of Moses. I will not keep silence, but I will recompense, even recompense it to their bosom. Your iniquities and the iniquity of your fathers together, saith Yahweh, which have burned incense upon the mountains and blasphemy upon the hills. Therefore I will measure their former work into their bosom. Thus saith Yahweh, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one says, destroy it not, for there is a blessing in it. So will I do for my servants' sakes, that I may not destroy them all. And I will bring forth a seed out of Jacob, and out of Judah, and an inheritor of my mountains, and my elect shall inherit it, and my servants will dwell there. This time of judgment that Moses wrote to be a witness before Yahweh. The song of judgment that was darkness and not light. It had a purpose, it had a mission, and it had something very tangible that it affected. It was not just to destroy the sinner, but it was to teach future generations to memory, to remember their history, and to no longer sin. But what God did during the day of judgment, the strange and awesome work that he did, is not to be destroyed. It is to remain for future generations. The memory is once again a powerful tool. We can remember the people who provoked God to jealousy, who faced bitter destruction, and who were given as a prey to beasts and to serpents. But when you remember what is written in Moses' Song of Judgment, blindness is also lifted for your eyes so that you can clearly see. I want to point out to you a promise that is given to us within Moses' judgment song that is too often overlooked. We tend to think of Moses' judgment song as simply the hiding of the face, as a time where it is darkness. But it is, in fact, there is a blessing within this judgment, and it is found at the latter end. Read with me again Deuteronomy 31, verses 17 and 18. And we're going to actually read through verse 19. This is when Yahweh states that his anger will be kindled against Israel in that day. And I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, that they shall be devoured, and many evils shall come upon them, so that they will say, are not all these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? And I will hide my face for all the evils which they have wrought, and are turned to other gods. Now therefore write you this song, teach it to the children of Israel, put it in their mouths to be a witness for them. And if you'll drop down to verse 21, you will find the blessing within Moses' Song of Judgment. And the blessing is this, is that it shall come to pass when the evils and the troubles have befallen them, that this song will testify against them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten out of the mouths of their children. The promise in this Song of Judgment is that Israel's descendants will not forget the day of judgment. It is within this song that we find that reason for our long diaspora. It is in this that we find why all the troubles and tribulations have come upon us. And because we can remember Moses' Song of Judgment, because we can recall it among the nations where we are scattered, we can also return to the God that led us captive, to the God that saved us and delivered us into the hands of our enemies, and to remember the causes for the destruction. If you remember last week in Deuteronomy 29, verse 22, Moses talks of a generation that would remember. They would remember the covenant. They would remember why Israel was cast off the land, because they had broken the covenant and because they had provoked Yahweh's anger. We are this generation that is awaking to and remembering the Song of Moses, And this song has not been forgotten out of our mouths. When we investigate the reasons for God's anger, when we investigate the reasons for the diaspora, we are, each and every one of us, fulfilling that call to remember the Song of Moses and to remember the wise. We are fulfilling the promise of a generation that the prophets foretold would remember her God. Memory is a powerful tool, but it also leads to questions. We want to know that there is hope, that our hope in Scripture is not in vain. We wonder if God will cast us off forever. Will he continue to hide his face from us today? And when will God remember us? When God remembered Israel's sins, when he judged her during the day of Yahweh for forsaking her, it had a very strange effect. You see, after a while of Israel getting what she wanted, of following her own lust as she had in the wilderness, and of following in her own ways, she actually became tired of it. She discovered that her ways did not work, and she discovered that her gods offered her no salvation. And at some point in time, she chose to remember. She chose to remember God and forget her idols. In Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah tells us that teaching us to remember God and forget our idols was the purpose of the day of Yahweh. If you look at Isaiah chapter 2, verse 12, this is what he tells us. For the day of Yahweh of hosts shall be a prey upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower and fenced wall, and upon the ships of Tarshish, and upon the pleasant pictures. And the loftiness of man will be bowed down, and the haughtiness of man will be made low. And Yahweh alone will be exalted in that day. And the idols shall utterly be abolished. And they shall go into the holes of rocks and into caves of the earth, for the fear of Yahweh, for the fear of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Hosea was a contemporary with Isaiah, and he built on this. He built on Isaiah chapter 2, verse 20, where Isaiah states, in that day, man will cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which he has made for himself to worship. He will cast them to the moles and the bats. Hosea builds on this theme in chapter 14. He tells of Israel's backsliding and how Yahweh's judgment heals Israel's sin, and how Israel remember her God and his way of life. In Hosea chapter 14, verses 4 through 8, this is what Hosea tells us. He says, I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for my anger is turned away from him. Now, why is God's anger turned away? And specifically, Hosea is speaking of Ephraim. Why is God's anger turned away from Ephraim? We find the answer in verse 8. Because it is what Ephraim remembers, and it is what Ephraim does. And this is what Hosea tells us. Ephraim shall say, what have I to do any more with idols? I have heard him, and I have observed him. I am like a green fir tree, and from me is your fruit found. Hosea continues to say, who is wise that he should understand these things, and prudent that he shall know them? So for the ways of Yahweh are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall. The blessing, the ultimate blessing that arises from the day of Yahweh comes from the fact that this long, this depressing and hard day where Yahweh forsook us actually heals us. It heals us from our idolatry. We no longer trust in idols, but Ephraim trusts in Yahweh's. And when this happens, God hears our prayer. He hears our prayer and he answers us. David had foretold of a day when this generation would remember. We would remember the warning and the instruction written for us by our forefathers. We would have the collective memory to recall the words that had been written down thousands of generations before. We would remember the works of God in Egypt, his victory over Canaan, and how we then, as a collective body, waxed fat and rebelled. But then towards the end of his psalm, David issues a call to both Yahovah and to Israel in later days. This instruction and this call to remembrance is found in Psalms 44. Now, we're not going to read the entire psalm, but we are going to read parts of it. We're going to begin with Psalms 44, verses 1 and 2. David states, "We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us what work you did in their days, in old times." Remember Moses commanding future generations to remember the times of old? David is actually obeying that command in this psalm. In verse 2, "How you did drive the heathen out of the land, and you planted them. How you did afflict the people, and you cast them out." The psalm goes on to talk about how God established Israel in the stead of the Canaanites and how he blessed them. Then in verse 11, we find that Israel has rebelled. And we find that God had given us like sheep appointed for meat and has scattered us among the heathen. You sell your people for naught, and you do not increase their wealth by their price. You make us a reproach to our neighbors and a scorn and a derision to those that are round about us. You make us a byword among the heathen, a shaking of the head of the people. And David continues on in verse 17. And David states, "All this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you, nor have we dealt falsely in your covenant. Our heart is not turned back, neither have our steps declined from your ways. Though you have sore broken us in the place of dragons and covered us with the shadow of death. If we have forgotten the name of our God, or stretched our hands out to strange gods, would God not search this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Yes, for your sakes we are killed all the day, and we are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Awake, why do you sleep, O Yahovah? Arise and do not cast us off. Why do you hide your face and forget our affliction and our oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust, our belly cleaves to the earth. Arise for our help and redeem us for your mercy's sake." David talks about a day of salvation, a day when Israel's history is in the past, a day when the blessing and the curse have come upon Israel, a day where Yahovah's anger is in the past, where his forsaking of Israel is in the past, of a day where he no longer sends word to his people is in the past. David calls on Yahovah. He calls Yahovah to awake, to remember his covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to remember his people, to relieve their oppression, and to restore them to the land. Joel also remembered our generation. He remembered that we would return to Yahovah and that we would not forget his name, but we would actually call on the name of Yahovah. In Joel 2, verse 32, the prophet states, "And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of Yahovah shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as Yahovah has said, and the remnant whom Yahovah shall call." Memory is such a powerful tool. Use it. Remember the name of Yahovah and call on it. Call on it during Yom Kippur. Call on it every day of the week. Call upon the name of Yahovah and no other. take hold of his covenant to obey. And like Joseph, when God remembers us, when he remembers the love of the youth, he will restore. He will restore us to a place of honor, to a place of dignity within the nations. Today, Jerusalem is a very controversial place. It is claimed by 3 religious sects, 3 groups of people. Peace does not yet exist in Jerusalem. It is a place of contention. Should the capital of Israel exist in Jerusalem, or should it be given to the Palestinian state? Jerusalem has yet to be a praise in the earth. Jerusalem has yet to be remembered and restored. So, in closing, remember the promises. Remember the call to take hold of Yahovah's name, to plead your case, to plead for Zion, to plead for Jerusalem, and to give Yahovah no rest. Give him no rest until he makes Jerusalem a delight. And let me leave you today with the same charge that God gave to Joshua when God actually gave the Song of Moses, the Song of Judgment, at the exact same time. This was the charge Yahovah gave to Joshua. In Deuteronomy 31, verses 6 through 8, Yahovah states, "Be strong and be of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid. For Yahweh your God, it is he that goes with you. He will not fail you, nor will he forsake you." Memory is a powerful tool. Use it to remember the name of Yahovah and to call on his name. If you will remember, if you will obey, Yahovah will awake for you, and he will return and remember you. He will return to you, and he will seek you out from all places where he has scattered you. Shabbat Shalom. Now, if you guys will join me, we are going to have a dialogue session today. It will just be me, so we will interact online. If you will bear with me, I do have to change up some of the settings a little bit, simply because I have the privilege of serving as both Ross and Dave today. So I'm going to go over to my computer, and we'll have a dialogue, and it will simply be you and I talking online. So bear with me as I get this set up. Thank you. All right. So I figured we would just go ahead and launch into the dialogue session today and have fellowship. And I'm going to say this is open to anything that you guys want to discuss. We don't have to just do the Torah portion today. We can really discuss anything that's on your heart. So this is going to be open mic. So let me come up and see if there's any comments. And yes, Betty, we are keeping you and Roger in prayer, and praying that you will have, that he will have recovery very soon, and that you guys will also be enheartened along the way. Lorna states, God will remember us again on Shavuot, the day of Yahovah. He has determined 70 Shavuot in Daniel 9:24. The numerous in that day text point to that very day. You know, Lorna, this is a topic that is actually quite involved. I have, just from my years of study, I have an idea that I put out there in my book, that the 70 years or 70 weeks is a time of testing that was allotted for the Second Temple remnant. Oh, the swine flesh, let me see what text that was, Mark. And I'm going to come down. I'm just trying to get some of the, okay, you got it, Stacy. Thank you very much. See. I like your humor, Jonathan. Let's see. Miriam says, know that we are in the middle of the 10th day of the 10th days of awe. Yes. So any thoughts, any questions, any ideas you guys would like to discuss? I know it's a little bit more difficult having not having a panel where we get into those wonderful discussions that occur when you have thoughts being shared back and forth. But if there's anything out there, you guys just dive right in. All right. Yeah, Isaiah 64. Is that where you're looking for the swine flesh, or did that have some other context? So I love this time of year where you are able to get together. You have more opportunities to get together with others. And I want to invite you all to two Sukkot gatherings that are going to be held. One Sukkot gathering will be held from October 20th through 25th at Timms Ford State Park outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's where I will be. Another Sukkot gathering will be held outside of Gilmer, Texas, and Stacy Smith is rounding that one up. So if you would like to get together with people for the entire time or even just part of the time, please contact one of us and join in. The time that you spend together, the bonds of fellowship that you build, and the memories that you build from these times are just very special. They're very special, and you know, those days where you feel lonely, those days where you feel like you're the only one out there, it really helps to have had that personal contact and that personal interaction with another group of people. So I encourage you, if you can, please try to make one of the Sukkot events. All right. Well, I guess then we will wait for the dialogue since there are no questions. Now, again, let me remind you that on October 29th, that we will be having a dedication of the new facility in St. Francisville. So I encourage all of you guys to join us. Oh yes, Mark. The text about sitting among the graves and eating swine flesh. You know, a lot of those were pagan rituals to which he's referring to. If you'll remember, Leviticus especially banned many of the pagan practices with making offerings for the dead, with seeking to familiar spirits, or to making burnings for the dead. So all of that is within that context that Isaiah is speaking. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. So yes, I am so looking forward to being with you guys during Sukkot, as is Stacy. And we are going to make some incredible memories. Hopefully these will also be memories that our children will inherit, and a memory that will become very special as we gather ourselves together. All right, I'm going to sign off and say Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful, restful, and peaceful Shabbat. Goodbye.